Gordon Banks was anything but an ordinary player. He was the man who lost an eye and still outshone everyone on the field. Not only did he become England's #1 when it mattered most, but he also proved himself as the best goalkeeper in the world. A legend like no other, he didn't just overcome the odds, he redefined greatness. In October 1972, Banks's life changed forever when a car accident took away the sight in his right eye. For most players, that would have been the end of their career, but not for Banks. He wasn't the kind of man to back down from a challenge. Losing an eye was just another obstacle to overcome. And if there was one thing Banks did best, it was defying the odds. But this wasn't the only battle he had to fight. Years later, he was diagnosed with kidney cancer, a struggle that sadly led to his passing in 2019. Yet, despite everything life threw at him, his name had already been written into football history. The loss of his eye never stopped him from succeeding. Instead, it became part of the story that made him even greater. Banks wasn't just any goalkeeper, he was the goalkeeper. He was England's #1 when they lifted their first and only World Cup trophy in 1966. That moment alone was enough to make him a legend. But Banks didn't just ride on the glory of that victory, he was an essential part of it. England's triumph wasn't just about great attacking play, it was built on the solid foundation of Banks's presence between the posts. He was calm, reliable, and impossible to break down. And it wasn't just England that recognised his greatness. Around the world, Banks was widely regarded as the best goalkeeper of his time. This wasn't just media hype, it was backed by his performances, his countless accolades, and, most importantly, the respect he commanded from fellow players. He wasn't just good, he was consistently world-class. But even when you're at the top, people will always have questions. In 1967, after winning the World Cup, Banks made a surprising decision. He left Leicester City for Stoke City. Many eyebrows were raised. Stoke were a solid club, no doubt, but they weren't at the same level as the biggest teams in England at the time, clubs like Liverpool, Manchester United, or even Leicester themselves. For a goalkeeper of his calibre, some wondered if he was settling for less. Was it the right move? Did it show a lack of ambition? But Banks never played for status. He played for the love of the game. He didn't need the biggest club to prove he was the best. No matter where he played, he was the best. His performances for Stoke, just like everywhere else, spoke louder than any doubts people had about his decision. He kept proving himself over and over again, not just as England's hero, but as one of football's greatest goalkeepers of all time. From his early days, he faced many challenges, especially with injuries, but he always battled through like a true champion. His journey to becoming one of the greatest goalkeepers of all time didn't start with instant success. In fact, it was full of challenges, setbacks, and moments that tested his resilience. But if there was one thing about Banks, it was that he never backed down. Back in 1953, Chesterfield scouted him while he was playing for Millspaw and offered him a 6-game trial with the youth team. He did well enough to earn a part-time contract for £3 a week. At first, things weren't exactly glamorous. His reserve team was placed in the Central League, not because they were good, but because a powerful club director pulled some strings. The result? A miserable season where Banks conceded 122 goals. It would have been enough to break most young goalkeepers, but not him. During his national service, Banks was stationed in Germany with the Royal Signals and even won the Rhine Cup with his regimental team. That experience toughened him up, and after recovering from a fractured elbow, he helped Chesterfield's youth team reach the FA Youth Cup final in 1956. They lost 4-3 on aggregate to Manchester United's legendary Busby Babes, a team featuring future stars like Bobby Charlton. Banks finally got his big break in 1958 when manager Doug Livingstone handed him his first team debut against Colchester United. The game ended in a 2-2 draw, but Banks held on to the starting spot, missing just 3 games due to injury that season. The catch? There was no goalkeeping coach to guide him, so Banks had to learn everything the hard way by making mistakes and figuring out how to fix them. He quickly developed into a commanding presence, shouting instructions and organising the defence in front of him. Then came the unexpected twist. Leicester City, a First Division club, bought him for £7,000 in 1959. Banks, with barely 23 league appearances under his belt, was suddenly competing against 5 other goalkeepers, including experienced Scotland international international Johnny Anderson. He started the season in the reserves, but after an injury to Dave McLaren, Banks got his chance. His debut was a 1-1 draw against Blackpool, and though he was briefly sent back to the reserves, Leicester's first-choice keepers struggled, and Banks reclaimed his spot. He made sure he wasn't giving it up again. He worked tirelessly to improve, putting in extra hours in training, something rare in an era with no specialised goalkeeping coaches. By the following season, both Anderson and McLaren had left the club, making Banks the undisputed number one. Leicester finished 6th in 1961 and reached the FA Cup final against Tottenham, who had already won the league. Unfortunately, Leicester were forced to play with an injured right-back for most of the game and never really stood a chance, losing 2-0. The next season was disappointing, but Banks had his first taste of European football in the Cup Winners' Cup. Torn between playing for England or Leicester, he chose both, rushing from one game to another. But despite his best efforts, Leicester were knocked out by Atletico Madrid. In 1963, Leicester looked like they could win both the league and FA Cup. Banks put in one of his finest performances in the FA Cup semi-final, keeping a clean sheet despite Liverpool dominating the game. But then disaster struck. He broke his finger and missed the final few league games, and Leicester collapsed to 4th place. To make matters worse, they lost the FA Cup final 3-1 to Manchester United. Though the league form was inconsistent, Leicester found success in the League Cup, beating Stoke City in the final in 1964. Banks, however, was growing frustrated. Despite being a top goalkeeper, he was paid only £40 a week, and the club refused to give him a substantial raise. This led to unrest among the squad, and key players started leaving. By 1966, Leicester were struggling, and despite Banks winning the World Cup with England that summer, Leicester shockingly decided to replace him with a young Peter Shilton. Banks was told bluntly that his best days were behind him, and he was put on the transfer list. Many top clubs hesitated to spend big money on a goalkeeper, but Stoke City saw his value. Leicester refused to pay him a loyalty bonus, and Banks only agreed to the move after Stoke seemingly negotiated a payment. Years later, he discovered that Leicester never paid him a penny. Stoke had covered the amount. At Stoke, Banks found a team of experienced veterans who still had plenty to prove. In his early years, the club struggled, but by 1970, they were becoming competitive. Banks remained a rock at the back, making incredible saves, including one where he caught a powerful header from Wyn Davies and another where he stopped a close-range volley from Alan Gilzean. Stoke came close to an FA Cup final in both 1971 and 1972, but were heartbreakingly eliminated by Arsenal each time. In 1972, a controversial penalty and an offside goal denied them a place in the final. Banks admitted years later that he still felt cheated out of that chance. But then came a moment of glory. Stoke's 1972 League Cup win. After a dramatic semi-final win against West Ham, they faced Chelsea in the final. Banks played a crucial role, and Stoke won 2-1, securing the club's first major trophy. His incredible performances earned him the FWA Footballer of the Year award, making him the first goalkeeper to win it since Bert Trautmann in 1956. Then, in 1972, disaster struck. Driving home from a physio session, Banks was involved in a serious car accident. He suffered horrific injuries to his face and lost sight in his right eye. Doctors gave him a 50-50 chance of saving his vision, but the damage was irreversible. Without depth perception, playing professionally was impossible, and he was forced to retire in 1973. But Banks wasn't done with football. In 1977, he made a surprise comeback, playing in the North American Soccer League for the Fort Lauderdale Strikers. At 39 years old and with one working eye, he was still so good that he was named NASL Goalkeeper of the Year. He also had a brief spell in Ireland, playing one game for St Patrick's Athletic and keeping a clean sheet. Banks finally retired from playing in 1978, but his legacy was already secured. His journey from a young goalkeeper conceding 122 goals in a season to becoming a World Cup winner, League Cup champion, and one of the best shot stoppers football has ever seen was nothing short of extraordinary. He faced rejection, financial struggles, career-threatening injuries, and even blindness. But he never stopped fighting, and that's why he remains one of the most inspiring figures in football history. And that wraps up today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an update.